Welcome back. On today's lifestyle segment, we'll be discussing the high rate of divorce in modern times. Marriage, as we all know it, is the legitimate union of two or more people living together for the purpose of companionship and with the legal rights to raise and support children. In modern times, these partnerships are being threatened by sensitive issues like lack of trust, inadequate finance, poor health and sexual satisfaction, family dispute, not giving birth to male children, or no children at all. However, marriage still remains a highly valued institution, even though the divorce rate in Nigeria, in modern Nigeria, has escalated. Joining us in today's program to discuss this, we have.
Right beside me, we have a lawyer, a counselor, a lifestyle and behavioral coach. Welcome to the show, Mrs. Oyiwodu. Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Also with us in the studio, we have with us Reverend Vincent Idanwojo, the Director of Spirit and Communication Center here in Abuja. Welcome to the show, Reverend.
Thank you very much.
It's also my pleasure to welcome Shaykh Adam Idris Tahir, who is the Director of the Zayatona Islamic Center. Welcome to the Weekend Show.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Let me start with you, Mrs. Oyiwodu. There's a popular conversation, a popular notion now among several Nigerians that the rate or the increasing rate of divorce is mainly attributed to the fact that the men are not willing to make as much sacrifices as the women for their marriages to work. Do you agree with this notion? If yes, how so? And if no, also, how so?
Thank you. Talking of sacrifices, marriage involves a lot of sacrifices and is expected both from the man and from the woman. To a large extent, women are more, into the sacrifice, mode when it comes to their families. And in as much as generally the men know that this is supposed to be my responsibility, that is supposed to be my responsibility as touching my wife, my children, my family entirely, very few of men lately seem to understand what sacrifices are in terms of other means of support for the family other than giving money. Sacrifices in other terms, other than meeting your financial obligations, are not really something men are groomed, or most of them are not, into it in marriages.
Okay, Imam, I'll come to you. Divorce, actually, it's happening every day. Yesterday, I saw somebody celebrating his divorce online. And most people, before they get married and when they have issues, they go to their religious leaders. Is there anything wrong with divorce? And at what point will you, as a religious leader, tell a married couple, this isn't working, maybe you should go your separate way?
Divorce is permissible in Islam, but with certain conditions attached to it. You don't just feel like maybe separating from your wife and you tell her you're divorced. It must meet some conditions that, one, there must be some irreconcilable conflict or differences before maybe the families can actually come in to serve as arbiters between the two parties. And even at that, one, the arbiters must come together from the man's family and the woman's family to actually look at how they can actually reconcile them. And if it becomes irreconcilable, they cannot stay together, then it becomes permissible. And that's why the Prophet of Islam says the most abhorrent thing among permissible things before God is divorce. It is permissible when there are irreconcilable differences, but it is abhorrent in the sight of the Almighty.
Interesting perspective. Reverend, let me bring you in here. I know the Catholic Church is actually very strict on the issue of divorce, but in modern times where we see all these issues springing up and people are like, you know, they have to actually get a divorce, is the Catholic Church looking to change its strict laws on this issue of divorce, or are there is there a shift in perspective, I mean, in regards to how you preach about divorce in the Catholic Church?
Okay, the Catholic Church sees divorce as forbidden because God himself hates divorce. God himself have severally communicated to the church and to humanity that he hates divorce. Reason being that marriage is a sacred thing. As a matter of fact, God ordained marriage. It was not even man who demanded for a woman. It was God who said it's not good for man to be alone. And so God is the origin of marriage. And he said, what God has put together, let no man whatsoever put asunder. So it's not, the church doesn't have the authority or the power to divorce. But we live in the human environment where a lot of things are coming up and challenging this very sacred thing called marriage. It's no longer seen from the point of view of the sacredness of marriage is no longer there. It's now approached from the humanistic point of view. And it has created a lot of crises where we no longer want to understand each other. And it has led to a point where people now, couples and married individuals now make, as it were, they see reasons why they should divorce, instead of not seeing it as an option at all. And part of what has led to all this is because the preparation for marriage has been taken for granted. The preparation for marriage has been taken for granted. Marriage is seen as just maybe one of those social stuff out there. People just get up and then get married. And that's why the Catholic Church, before you get married in the Catholic Church, you are given some kind of rudimentary training, as it were. You pass through some courses. They call it the marriage course. And at least up to 3 months, you'll be given some kind of clues on what marriage is all about. Because marriage is not just what we see, it's not just what we can just dabble into without due preparation. So the church is not in any way thinking of giving room to permit divorce. Rather, what the church is doing is to continue to expand her tentacles of teaching and educating people to understand deeper and deeper the mystery of marriage. So they can embrace it whole and entire and enjoy the blessings therein.
Mrs. Oyiwodu, Reverend Vincent just spoke about the preparation for marriage. I think with every religion, they have like preparatory classes where they speak to the couple, advise them. But even though there are grounds for divorce, there's an area which is hardly ever spoken about, which is the influence of families on couples. And so it starts from the societal pressure to get married, and then you get married. Next thing they say, oh, you need to have a child. You have a child, they say, oh, you have a girl, how about you have a boy? And next thing they're like, okay, in some cultures they go, oh, your wife is not giving you a boy, let's get somebody else to give you a girl. Or you have family members come live in your house. And then in times of conflict, who do you support, your family member or your partner? I don't think extended family members are invited to these premarital classes and the likes. But what's your take on the influence of family, immediate and extended, on couples, which leads to conflict and then they have to take a side? And how can we change this?
All right, I was going to add while the Reverend was talking, the preparation for marriage itself cannot adequately be done by the religious outfits. by the churches, by the mosque. The family has a great role to play in it. The values of marriage, the culture of marriage, what makes marriage to be is something that ought to be inculcated into the training of our sons at home and our daughters at home. It's not just something that we can, get into the heads of some two different people that are coming together within a short period of 1-2 months or 1-2 years of premarital counseling. It's something that over the years, as you're training your children, those values, you're preparing them for life. You're also preparing them for marriage. That is for those who are called on to marriage, who would eventually be married or choose, marriage as one of their life, principles thereafter. So it's something, family has a very big role to play in it. Parents have a big role to play in it. Fathers have a big role to play in it. It's not something for the clergies alone. It's something that begins from the homes. It's something that starts from the very moment you begin to teach your sons how to work with their hands. And you teach them in practical forms. Do this, do that. They learn that these are some of the things you do. Those are the values they take to marriage. How they respect girls. How they should talk. How they should, take care of their family, the headship of the family. It's something that begins from the home.
I love the fact that you've spoken about the role of the family, but I also want to ask also about the legal role, because I know you have a legal background. Yeah. So a lot of people think marriage is just, oh, I'm in love, so let me get married. But there's a legal implication to this. You're signing a contract with another individual to get married to that person. God forbid if something happens to you, most likely that person is going to inherit your property, going to take responsibility of, what happens therefore with your family estate. So it's actually, there are legal complications to going into this union with another human being. And most people are not aware of that legal aspect. Most of them just think, okay, this is a societal badge, I'm married, it's good, and I'm in love with this person. So from your legal background, can you talk to us more about the legal implications of going into this contractual agreement of marriage with another individual?
Basically, the law is not so different from what, the cultural values are, When you sign a pact to say, this is the person I choose, this is the man or this is the woman I choose, legally, you are meant to be committed to that person. The law, provides for, or rather, enjoins that you provide them for your family. The law also, because it's one of the grounds too, where a spouse can file for divorce, where a man is habitually absent and does not provide for the family. It's one of the grounds. So you're committed to the person in that provision for your family. You're committed to the person even in raising the children. It's your obligation, legally too. Whichever way, whichever means, whichever principles you have on raising your children, but it's your obligation to raise your children to become people, that the society, that will not be ills in the society. So you owe the society that obligation. You also, as a husband or a wife, you owe each other, that duty of trust, the duty of uniformity, because that's the presumption of law that you have that property, I have that property, it's something that both belongs, to the couple. So generally, it's not any too different from what the societal culture has, embedded in our society, especially the African society.
Okay, let me bring Reverend back in. We heard Mrs. Oyiwodu speak about raising the child right and in the right way, but a good scenario, for instance, you hear a woman complaining about her husband not being supportive in some cases. Meanwhile, they have their first child, who is a boy, who is not allowed to enter the kitchen because some people would say, oh, this is the role of the woman. And so patriarchy and entitlement comes into the fray at some point where you've raised your child to respect women, to do X, Y, Z. But you've also divided roles and say, this is for a man, this is for a woman. And so a man would come, respecting the upbringing he has had, saying, this is what I was told. Meanwhile, as a woman, you may have your different upbringing, or even another boy from another family may have a different upbringing. And then we come to the churches where, because I'm a Christian and I go to churches, and most times it's about women do this, to keep your man do this, to please your husband do this. Whose role is it to guide the men in the right direction when it comes to marriage? Because a lot of this effort and comments and lectures are usually targeted towards the women. Who is talking to the men?
Okay, I would like to look at your question from this point of view, that life is a learning process. At every stage in life, you are bound to learn. The moment you stop learning, you'll start dying. And this also comes to play when it comes to family, marriage, childbearing, and even upbringing. And so, at every point in time, everybody is bound to learn, and that is what actually brings about growth. I think whether we like it or not, there are some structures who are found in our societies that are, as it were, found in some cultures and maybe languages, and as we have diversities in the society, and that, as it were, is carried into marriage. Where you talk about this, the patriarchal society, where maybe the boy in the family is given and taught that this is the way to live and never to live this way, and then he grows with it, and then it ends up creating more problem, as it were. Maybe sometimes he's seen as someone who is not sensitive to the need of the family, because he was taught, either, for instance, don't sweep the house, okay? That a man does not sweep the house. Every culture needs to be, as it were, evangelized, if I may use the language from my point of view. Every culture needs to grow. As the world is growing, everything in the world is growing, everything in the world is changing. Cultures too should change to adapt system that will help live a life wholly, that will be full of joy and peace. So, in as much as we have cultures and ideologies that maintain certain stands and does not give room for growth, those structures need to be open to the reality of the need of the time. And so, whether we like it or not, so we have institutions in society, sometimes maybe institution of learning that comes maybe through counseling and through other avenues, marriage awareness seminars, that tries to come and bridge this gap. So in the society where we have men who have this kind of ideology, they should be exposed to the teachings that come from these structures that try to make family life much, much easier. So, but if they hold on to tenaciously to whatever culture they were brought, they were raised in, and they communicate to their children, and they're not ready to open up to the reality of the time, because whether we like it or not, the reality of the time makes demands. And the reality of the time is that things have changed. In the time past, maybe much later in the past, those things could hold. But as time goes on, they lose their grips.
So do you then change the angle of your preaching in church, you know, to reflect this reality?
Sure.
Okay, so it's no longer women, you must do this, you must do that.
No,
it's now both in sexes.
Family thing is not is not something that you compartmentalize, as it were. Okay, and that's why you see that when couples are being prepared for the sacrament of matrimony in the Catholic Church, they are made to pass through a lot of courses that expose them to this. And so what are we trying to do? We are trying to avoid the clash of culture. where maybe, for instance, a woman is brought up in a culture where the man supports the woman in doing everything, while the man is coming from a culture where the strata of functions are there. During the courses, they are made to understand that now they are coming to the church, the cultures are being evangelized, and then the values of the gospel are brought to bear with the reality of their culture. For instance, where Jesus will say, he who, serves another is the highest. So we are called to serve. And so this service should permeate every fiber of the family life.
Imam, let me bring you in here. So correct me if I'm wrong, but we've all heard in the secular media that in the Muslim religion, to divorce a wife, you could just say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you 3 times, and that wife stands divorced. So if that is true, how then do we go about preaching this equality and equity and fairness that we've discussed so far on this panel? How then do we go about fostering these discussions that women also have, some right in their household and they should be treated fairly?
You see, if you want to know about Islam, you don't go into the media. You go into Islamic books to actually read about Islam. Because sometimes the media, sometimes depending on who is handling it, they have their own perspective, and they want to actually give out that perspective, whether it is right or wrong. So the thing is, even as Islam is a very practical religion. So even as Islam allows repudiation of marriage or divorce, it does not encourage it. Because definitely there will be some times in some couple life that you can no longer cohabit well. The whole conflict is irreconcilable. Islam gives you the right, whether as the man, the husband or the wife. It's not only about the husband,
Okay.
and it's not only about the wife. The husband can initiate it, and that is known as talaq. And the woman too can initiate it, which is known as khul. So if the woman feels, look, her rights are being trampled upon, and she cannot reconcile with the husband anymore, and she is dying silently, or maybe she is dying under the machonistic tendency of the man, she can initiate it. She can actually initiate it, and if both of them have agreed, then it becomes mutual.
So they have to agree.
They have to agree.
Okay.
Yes.
So if a woman wants to leave her marriage
Yes.
and her husband says, no, you can't leave this marriage, then she cannot divorce him.
No, she cannot divorce
So
him.
but what if he wants to divorce her and she doesn't want to leave the marriage?
He too has no legal right. And that is why scholars of Islam have classified such divorce as talaqul bid'ah, which is a divorce of innovation. It was not the practice of the Prophet ﷺ, and it was not encouraged in the Quran. You don't have the right to just meet your wife and say, I've divorced you 3 times. For someone who has deep knowledge of Islamic jurisprudence, he will consider that as an innovative divorce.
So that
To
means
him,
it's
it
being
doesn't
done,
count.
but is not part of the religion.
It's not part
so
of the
people are just
religion.
innovating new
Of
ways.
course.
Okay.
It's like in the society today, some people, they are fond of possibly testing different women. As they marry, they divorce, they bring another one. You understand? They try to give it a legal backing by saying, oh, if I say she's divorced, she has to go. In Islam, you don't just divorce a woman and tell her to go, because divorce serves as a means for reconciliation. And that's why the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, at-talaqu marratan. That is, the marriage that, the divorce that is reconcilable is 2 times. I mean, there are 2 times. When you divorce her, she has to wait for 3 menstrual cycle so that you can actually have everything. Maybe as she's there, and possibly at that time she's not very accessible to you, or he is not accessible to her. They will have actually a rethink of maybe we need to go back, we need to reconcile. And you don't have to send her out. The only time you can send her out outrightly after the divorce is when she is into indecency. Then that, there is no trust, there is nothing about it. And when there is no trust, marriage is bound to actually die.
What does indecency consist of?
When we say indecency, adultery, specifically, if she is into adultery.
That's just for the woman's side?
Yeah.
Okay, not for the man?
Not for the man. If the woman feels, look, he is actually into adultery, and therefore I cannot stay with him, she can initiate the divorce. Okay. And if she decides to forgive him, that is her right.
Okay, so in modern times, because we're also talking about this in modern times, we're always quick to blame technology. And this is to all of you on this couch. Do you feel, because the numbers have actually increased, I think the stigma has reduced also, and so both male and female, they could wake up today and say, we're living, yes, there are issues of domestic violence, there's adultery, there's also deceit, where a lot of people get into marriage based on deceit. Do you feel technology has played a role in the increased rate of divorce?
Yes, I think technology has actually increased the rate because, one, the way people communicate these days could actually bring about distrust. Maybe a woman could just actually receive maybe a message from an anonymous person she doesn't even know, who is possibly maybe wrongly or mistakenly sent her a message. And as soon as the husband sees it, there's a problem. Or as soon as maybe the wife sees it, it becomes a problem. So that could lead into that, maybe the increase in the rate of divorce. And again, it could equally lead to indecency. For example, a lot of things are happening on social media today where people share pictures, where they share ideas and the rest. Some of these things could easily prompt either the husband or the wife to actually maybe devaluing the wife or the husband. And that will equally affect the rate of divorce in the society. And that is why in Islam, you don't have to actually maybe allege that your wife or your husband is doing something until you have established it as a fact, as a reality. If you don't establish it as a reality and you come out in the open to say it, you will, at the end of the day, actually destroy your own image, and which Islam actually prohibits. So, just like I said earlier, divorce, even as it is actually permissible in Islam, it is absolutely discouraged.
Well, that's very interesting, and I love the fact that we have such a mixed panel. You know, we have the Christians, we have the Muslims, and we have, I don't know what religion you practice, but you're definitely speaking from the legal and societal perspective on this issue, because this is an issue that we've discussed on the show before, and our viewers keep bringing it up as something that they're interested in, because we know that Nigeria is a very religious country, 50% Muslims, 50% Christians. and I'm sure there's some traditionalists mixed in there that practice either or. But at the same time, this societal stigma, as Andy said, of divorce is actually reducing. You know, it's becoming more acceptable in society. Women are getting divorced, men are getting divorced, and some of them are actually justifiable. I know Reverend might think, well, it's forbidding, so nothing is justifiable. But in cases of domestic violence, lies, blatant deceit, you got into this institution with, you know, someone, you had this perceived image of this person which was told to you by that person, and later on you find out that none of it is true. You know, so Reverend, let me end with you. I know I've talked to you about the teachings of the Catholic Church, and you've talked about re-strategizing that to fit the modern day culture, but still in line with the doctrines of the Catholic institution. However, when you use words like forbidding, like divorce is forbidding, do you mean that holistically, or do you mean that in certain situations that are extreme, like divorce, or like domestic violence, for instance, that is permissible? And is there a way that we can make perhaps the process more lenient for people that have justifiable reasons like that?
Yeah, I think the church too has structures that handle such cases, and especially those that have become very precarious and could be very, very detrimental to people's lives and all that. Okay, in as much as the church condemns and prohibits divorce, the church permits some what they call separation. When there are cases of incompatibility and going to have very worse scenarios that could hamper the life of either parties, the church will always give room to reflect again. Okay, and that moment of separation is given for each party to go and reflect and think about whatever has caused the tension that have existed in a marriage. And so during that time too, the church does not just allow the parties to be on their own. And that's why the church has what they call is a structure called is a structure that handles marriage cases in the tribunal. They call it the marriage tribunal. Okay, where each party sometimes are invited, because normally when it comes to that point where each party decide to say, okay, we don't want to continue longer, you have to go to the tribunal to give your report, and they are invited, and their cases are studied, as it were. Okay, there's a point it will come. They say, okay, can you give people some breathing space? Be on your own. The church will not say, okay, let us break up the marriage, because it's only God that can do that. Okay, and then if in the course of following them up to understudy their case, then certain things are saying that are very, very, derogatory and maybe has a very, very negative impact on the family, on the marriage. The church may ask them to be separated eternally, especially when you find things like the issue of deception. Okay, you concealed something that is very, very pertinent in marriage from your partner, and then it was discovered after the marriage has been, blessed. The church considered even the marriage as null and void. Okay, at that point, the church will now say that the truth of the matters were not laid bare. Okay, so the church at that point can allow both parties to separate. So for
divorce, there's a difference.
As far as it's concerned, because there was deception, the church considers that marriage not valid.
But there's the part also in the same religion of Christianity and the New Testament where Jesus speaks on divorce. The New Testament gives grounds for divorce, specifically, not separation, saying, especially, and the main case which supports it, the main ground for it is adultery. Now, thanks to innovation and the reality of times and evolution, we've added things like domestic violence and deceit, amongst other things. But Jesus, who is an integral part of the Christian religion, clearly speaks on, talks about divorce. Why is some parts of the church silent about this and pushing more for separation?
If you read that particular part of the scriptures, you will see that Jesus was quoting Moses, as it were. because they were trying to bring up a case of divorce, and then I think one of the disciples were asking, don't we have the right to divorce when we find such and such a thing? And Jesus said, okay, this was given to you, but it wasn't so from the beginning. Okay, so there were things that Moses in the Old Testament was compelled to write, not because God asked him to write it, but just to be able to, handle the issue there and then. Okay, there were other cases too of other things like where they were saying that it just said it was your stubbornness that made Moses to write that, but for God from the beginning it was not so. So that's why you see the church takes a lot of time to really study the case and see where we need to allow the gospel values. That's the mind of the church, and that's the sign of the church. Let us, as much as possible, allow the values of our faith influence the marriage. Okay. So because when it comes in that way, you will see that at the end of it all, Jesus is involved. Christ is involved in that marriage. Okay. Yeah. But when we want to go humanistic, completely pragmatic, so without faith, then some of this is start coming up.
I know, Reverend, I said I would give you the last word, but I would give Mrs. Oyiwodu the last word because you're speaking from the more realistic perspective, what everyday Nigerians and people who are watching are going through. But hearing what the Imam has said, hearing what the Reverend has said, we look at the legalistic procedures that you have to go through to actually enact a divorce, whether you were deceived, whether you were experiencing domestic violence. So how then do we sort of sensitize the general public and people who are looking forward to marriage, to pay more attention, to this institution that they're going into? Because when he said that tribunal, I was like, wow, this is serious. But if we start to look at it like that this is actually a very important decision. You wouldn't sign a contract with any Tom, Dick, and Harry that you meet on the street. So don't do that same thing in marriage. So how do we go about sensitizing the general public, that this institution is actually very sacred, it's very important, and it has a long-term impact, on your personal life, on your professional life, and
even the children that come in as a result.
Most especially the children. So how then do we go about this sensitization? In 1 minute, please.
All right. The public generally, of course, the public is made of you and I, who started from the institution of a home, the marriage institution and the home. We all grew up in a home. So the first role, or where we all should begin from, where our parents, should all begin from, is the home. Teaching the values, teaching, basically, our men how to be, heads of their family, because that's where most of, the reasons why divorce is on a high rate. Yeah, because most men have left their place, that place of authority, that place of security, that place of the man as the head at the gate of the family. So that value will be taught from home first. And it starts from when we are raising the children, not when they become adults. Yes, we will do more, we will prepare them for marriage, how to handle it, but societally, the law gives room for reconciliation. And most times, before you would even bring an application for divorce, you ought to have statutorily gone through that, reconciliation procedure. Whether or not the courts go to verify, that reconciliation actually, or rather the process of ensuring that these people have a reconciliation was done or not, is not so much, in place. So maybe legally now, it's something we could look at in future, whereby, the place of the conciliators are made mandatory, where before you could file for divorce, you approach the conciliators, go through that process of, let's see what are the issues, how do we, make this relationship work. If we can have that mandatory place of the conciliators with a certification, as conciliators who are professional, and then probably come back to the courts only if the parties could have been reconciled, that such matters should actually go on and proceed, for divorce. But generally, it starts from the values that we teach our children, the roles that we begin to define for them, particularly our sons.
Most definitely, I completely agree
Thank
with you.
you.
Thank you so much, lady. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time on today's program. Don't forget to visit our website, www.weekendshow.ng, to watch this video, the full episode of this lifestyle segment on our website, and follow our social media at Weekend Show NG on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The conversation continues on the sports segment of the Weekend Show. Don't go anywhere.